Dear friends, a shocking mass shooting has just rocked the United States. The perpetrator, a 57-year-old man wearing a police uniform, a hat, and a silicone mask, knocked on the doors of several Minnesota state politicians at 2 a.m. When they opened the door, gunfire erupted. Some were killed, others critically injured. A backpack he carried contained a list titled 70 Names That Need to Be Dealt With. This was not a random act of violence, it was a calculated act of domestic terrorism, planned over several months. If you're interested in current and gripping true crime cases, hit subscribe to stay with us on this journey. A nightmare in Minnesota. In the early hours of June 14, 2025, in the city of Champlin, Minnesota, State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette were awakened by urgent knocking at their door. Security footage later revealed a man in a black jacket with a police badge standing next to an SUV resembling a patrol vehicle. John stepped out. The moment he opened the door, 9 gunshots rang out. Yvette rushed out behind him, only to be struck by 8 more rounds. Both collapsed. Blood soaked the doormat in front of their home. But the attacker didn't stop there. Less than an hour later, he drove to Brooklyn Park, the residence of former Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman. Again, the knocking came. Melissa and her husband, Mark, answered the door. This time, no one survived. Vance Bolter, the man who dressed as a cop, 1,500 characters, English version. The suspect was identified as 57-year-old Vance Luther Bolter, a name that had never made headlines before, yet behind it lay a meticulously crafted plan for mass murder. Bolter, a white male with a mild demeanor, had been involved in religious activities and previously worked in the private security sector. He claimed to be a security expert with experience in Gaza and Africa and co-owned a small security company with his wife. But few could have imagined that he had spent months transforming himself into a near-perfect replica of a law enforcement officer. Bolter owned at least 3 white SUVs, each modified to resemble patrol vehicles with fake decals, flashing lights, sirens, and even disguised antennas. He wore a bulletproof vest labeled police, gloves, and a realistic silicone mask to alter his appearance, projecting an aura of legitimacy and authority. When apprehended, police discovered a chilling arsenal in his backpack, a loaded semi-automatic handgun, a sharp tactical knife, a large box of ammunition, enough for many more victims. But the most terrifying item was a blacklist of nearly 70 names. The list included high-profile Democratic politicians, abortion providers, journalists, and members of the LGBTQ community. This was not random violence. It was a targeted campaign against those Bolter viewed as traitors to America. The enemies of the nation list. When police searched Vance Luther Bolter's backpack, SUV, and digital devices, they uncovered a chilling document, a clearly printed, numbered, and categorized list of nearly 70 individuals he had planned to assassinate. This was no random collection of names. Each entry included full names, home addresses, workplaces, personal details, and notes such as priority target, has bodyguard, goes for walks at 6 a.m., or usually home on Friday nights. What all the individuals had in common was striking. They were influential figures within the Democratic Party, ranging from local Minnesota leaders to federal level politicians. Many were vocal advocates for abortion rights, women's health, and reproductive freedoms. Several had supported stricter gun control measures, called for tighter licensing protocols, or challenged the widespread ownership of firearms. Some were journalists, doctors, social activists, or members of the LGBTQ plus community. Almost all had at some point criticized former President Donald Trump or opposed the MAGA, Make America Great Again movement. A handwritten 3-page letter found in Bolter's glove compartment revealed his extremist ideology. In it, he wrote, "They have betrayed America, betrayed God, and betrayed the truth. They're poisoning our youth, corrupting family values, and turning this country into filth. If no one else will stand up, then I will. This is the duty of a patriot." The tone of the letter was filled with rage and infused with a purification mindset characteristic of extremist rhetoric. According to psychological experts, this type of language is common among individuals influenced by conspiracy theories, disillusioned by modern society, and convinced they've been given a sacred mission. Data retrieved from Bolter's devices showed that he had been surveilling his targets for months. He had repeatedly parked near the homes of politicians, filmed their entrances, monitored security cameras, and recorded patterns like when house lights turned on or how close driveways were to major roads. On his computer, investigators found hundreds of images of maps, public event schedules, speech transcripts, and even building security layouts of several government facilities. All this evidence led investigators to a clear conclusion. This attack was not an impulsive act or the result of a mental breakdown. It was a meticulously planned act of political terrorism driven by radical ideology aimed at progressive American values and executed with disturbing precision. The unprecedented 43-hour manhunt shortly after the back-to-back shootings that left Melissa Hortman and her husband dead and Senator John Hoffman and his wife critically injured, Minnesota authorities issued a statewide emergency alert. Within 30 minutes, Vance Luther Bolter was identified as the prime suspect, thanks to security camera footage, eyewitness accounts, and the SUV license plate left at the scene. A massive manhunt was launched involving SWAT teams, the FBI, state police, highway patrol units, and drone surveillance, all deployed in an unprecedented statewide operation. This was not just a fugitive chase, it was the largest coordinated tactical response in Minnesota's modern history. Bolter, driving one of his police style SUVs, fled toward the rural area of Green Isle, about 110 kilometers from the crime scene. There, he parked in an abandoned field near a farmhouse, disabled his Jeeps, turned off his phone, and barricaded himself inside the vehicle. Authorities tracked him using traffic camera footage, previous GPS data, and tips from local residents who noticed the suspicious SU parked for hours without movement. At dawn on June 16th, more than 43 hours after the shootings, police surrounded the area. Bolter remained inside the vehicle, armed and prepared. The standoff was managed with restraint, no gunfire, no forced entry. Instead, officers employed psychological tactics and advanced technology. A loudspeaker system was set up, broadcasting surrender appeals. Reconnaissance robots were sent in to monitor the SUV and assess the threat. At the same time, K-9 units secured the perimeter in case Bolter attempted escape or had hidden explosives. The standoff lasted nearly 4 hours. Finally, at around 6 a.m., Bolter opened the door, crawled out lying flat, arms raised, offering no resistance. He was apprehended immediately, without a single shot fired. Agents on the scene reported Bolter was still carrying a handgun, wore a bulletproof vest, and had a knife hidden in his boot. He said nothing, his face cold and expressionless, as if emerging from a mission he believed he had completed. The operation ended without further casualties. but the scale and gravity of the manhunt have marked it as one of the most significant security events in Minnesota's recent history. America's first political assassination plot after 2024. Shortly after news of the Minnesota shooting broke, U.S. media outlets didn't hesitate to label it the largest state level political assassination attempt since the Capitol riot of 2021. The incident sent shockwaves not only through Minnesota, but across the entire nation because Bolter's targets were not random individuals, but democratically elected leaders within the American political system. The President of the United States addressed the press immediately. We're not dealing with an isolated act of gun violence. This was an act of domestic terrorism fueled by hatred, conspiracy theories, and the slow burning extremism festering within American society. We must call it what it is. Following this statement, the FBI Department of Homeland Security and several civil organizations issued formal warnings. America is witnessing the dangerous rise of far right extremism, especially from so called rogue veterans, former members of the military or law enforcement who now believe the government has betrayed them. Bolter was not affiliated with any official organization, but he had shared, liked, and commented in support of QAnon, the conspiracy movement that once flooded social media with misinformation. According to the FB, Bolter had indirect ties to several private online forums where users shared anti government, anti abortion, and anti globalist content. In archived posts, he once wrote, "The time for cleansing has come. A spiritual revolution is no longer enough. Now is the time to act." Sociologists and security experts argue that platforms like social media, where conspiracy theories run unchecked, have created a new breed of domestic terrorists, unaffiliated, self radicalized individuals who don't need orders or a group, just a false belief system and enough time to plan. Bolter is a textbook case. He wasn't impulsively triggered. He prepared in silence, moved in the shadows, and truly believed he was chosen to restore the order he thought had been betrayed. This case is not just a political security wake up call. It's a stark warning that American society is deeply fractured, not just by opinions, but now by bullets and blood. The victims, those left behind. When the gunfire ceased, it wasn't just blood that had been spilled. What remained were shattered families and grief that defied numbers, pain etched into the hearts of survivors. Vance Bolter's victims were not just political targets. They were human beings with lives, loved ones, and unfinished dreams. Melissa Hortman, 50 years old, former Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives, was one of two people killed in the attacks. She was a strong, determined woman who had played a key role in education reform, women's rights, and expanding access to community health care. Melissa was known as a symbol of calm, fairness, and dialogue in state politics. Her husband, Mark Hortman, also perished in the assault. A gentle man who always stood quietly beside his wife at public events, he was her steadfast supporter through every political journey. Both were killed on the doorstep of their home, just moments after answering a knock at midnight. Not far away in Champlin, State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette became Bolter's first targets. John was shot 9 times. Yvette took 8 bullets at close range. The scene outside their home was described as a pool of blood on melting snow, with 2 bodies lying motionless under a dim yellow porch light. In that critical moment, their daughter, Hope Hoffman, was awakened by the gunfire. She didn't panic. Instead, she ran out, activated the emergency alarm, called 911, and helped keep her parents conscious until help arrived. Doctors later said that if Hope hadn't acted as swiftly as she did, her parents might not have survived. John and Yvette were rushed into surgery that same night, undergoing hours of life-saving operations. Miraculously, both survived, each bearing nearly a dozen life-threatening injuries. In his first public appearance after the incident, Senator John Hoffman, his voice trembling, said, "I do not hate the man who shot me, but I fear for the future of this country. A nation where elected officials, those chosen by the people, can be attacked in their own homes in the middle of the night simply because of their beliefs. That is something I never thought could happen in America." The room fell silent because perhaps the deepest wound wasn't on his body, but in his shaken faith in a democracy once believed to be among the strongest in the world. Conclusion: Politics and Hatred. After his arrest, Vance Luther Bolter was charged with a long list of serious offenses at both the federal and state levels, including first-degree murder for the deaths of Melissa Hortman and her husband, attempted murder for the targeted attack on Senator John Hoffman and his wife, deliberate political terrorism aimed at legally elected officials, illegal possession and use of firearms, impersonating law enforcement officers to gain access and trust while carrying out the attack. The preliminary hearing is expected to take place in early July 2025. However, legal experts predict this case could drag on for years due to its complexity, combining political extremism, psychological profiling, and domestic terrorism. Welter may have acted alone, but he represents a growing threat. Individuals who self radicalize, consume conspiracy theories, and become convinced they must use violence to protect their beliefs. From the outside, he was an ordinary man, a middle aged husband running a security business, yet beneath the surface, he was a cold blooded killer who compiled a hit list of nearly 70 names. His story isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a mirror reflecting how deeply divided America has become. Where once political disagreements led to debates, they are now erupting into hatred, gunfire, and bloodshed right at people's doorsteps. The Minnesota case is a stark reminder that politics is no longer safe, even in one of the world's most stable democracies. When hatred is silently nurtured, when incendiary rhetoric goes unchecked online, and when extremist ideologies are allowed to fester, tragedy can strike at any moment. What are your thoughts on this case? Is this a modern act of political terrorism or just the rampage of a mentally disturbed lone wolf? Should the U.S. start reconsidering security protocols for state and local politicians, protecting them as high level officials? Leave a comment to share your perspective. Hit like if you believe this story deserves more attention. And subscribe to the channel for more true crime cases that are real, relevant, and thought provoking. Thank you for watching until the end. We'll be back soon with more cases, more questions, and your voice.